In Ross chapter 3, we're going to learn all about shavas. Shavas are wonderful little symbols that can be confusing at first, but they will be very helpful in how we pronounce a word. And there's a variety of different types of shavas, symbols, as well as the inseparable prepositions. We're going to learn about those in this chapter. So without further ado, let me introduce you to a symbol called shava in the Hebrew language. And it looks like this. If you will take a look at the box here, this box stands for any consonant in Hebrew, theoretically any consonant, so it's a placeholder. And then underneath there are two dots that are stacked one above the other. This is a shava, and that is spelled as S-H-E-W-A, shava or shawa. And this shava symbol can actually be of two different varieties. It could be a silent shava, which I will abbreviate with SS for silent shava, or it could be vocal shava. VS stands for vocal shava. What a shava does is it marks the absence of a vowel sound. Okay? This is true of both the silent and the vocal shava. Marks the absence of a true vowel sound. Okay? Now, when it's silent, it marks the complete absence of the vowel sound. And when it's vocal, that vowel sound has been reduced and hurried over. And so it's no longer a distinct vowel. It will look the same way whether it's silent or vocal. And that's why there can be some confusion here. Let me go ahead and just give you a couple of examples of shavas as silent or vocal. Okay? So first one, we're going to use the examples from the book here. This is Avram. This is the name of a character in the book of Genesis that you've probably heard of. This is Abram. In Hebrew, this shava is written, and it is a silent shava. So we have the Av, and then there is no sound associated with that shava. Av, and then the next sound after the bet is a resh, ram. Av, ram. And so you'll notice that the final sound here in this syllable, bet, or the V sound, goes right into the resh sound. So there is no sound for that silent shava. Av, ram. Were we to transliterate it, it would look like this. Notice B-R. Okay, and that is a bet without a dagesh lene, and so we'll have the line under it. Now, over here, I'll write another word where the shava will be vocal. Here we have the word shlomo. Shlomo. Here, the shava is a vocal shava, and it is going to be pronounced not as a full vowel sound, but as a reduced vocal noise, and it'll be like an sound. As in, when it's vocal, maybe the word about. Whenever you say the word about, that initial sound is really not a full A sound, is it? It's not about or about, it's just about. Okay? And that's what the vocal shava will often sound like when we pronounce it. Shlomo. And this is going to be transliterated this way. Shlomo. Okay? So the superscripted E will be smaller and written above is often the way you'll transliterate a vocal shava. Shlomo. It is such a reduced sound that sometimes in modern Hebrew, a word like shlomo would be pronounced shlomo, like slow motion, shlomo. Of course, if we know anything about this character in the Bible, Solomon, he was anything but slow-mo when it came to his love for women. Anyhow, I digress there. But silent shavas and vocal shavas are both represented by the same symbol. But that does raise a very important question for us, especially as you're in your introductory stages of learning Hebrew, and that is, how will you know the difference between when you should vocalize the shava and when you shouldn't? between when it's a silent shava or a vocal shava. And I'm glad you asked the question. Let me walk you through some steps for how to determine whether a shava that you're looking at is vocal or silent. And this is ROS 3.2, distinguishing between silent shava and vocal shava. Okay? Now, how do we distinguish between these two? It's actually not too difficult to do this if you'll keep a few simple rules in mind. Let me create some little boxes here to help with this. Now, I've drawn these boxes here, and they stand for the consonants of any given Hebrew word. So as you know, Hebrew words can have just a couple of consonants, or they could have more than 4. But this string of 4 boxes represents any 4 Hebrew consonants of a word. And they're going to be used to show shava placement and how shava placement can help us to distinguish vocal from silent shava. Now, the very first rule, and these are summarized in ROS, but they're not given by way of a schematic like this. So I think this can be helpful to students. But what ROS tells us is that shavas at the beginning of a syllable are vocal, shavas at the end of a syllable are silent. And of course, at the beginning of a word, so here is any consonant that begins a Hebrew word and a shava under it, that's by definition going to be the beginning of a syllable too. So we can say that any shava at the beginning of a word is going to be vocal. Okay? That's a vocal shava. And as an example, here is a word. It's just 2 consonants long, but under the lamed I have a shava. That's the first letter. Therefore, the shava is vocal. All right, if I were going to transliterate this, how would I do it? I would make sure that after my lamed I had a superscripted E for the shava and its vocal, the K with no dot in it, that is going to have the line, and the long A, so lecha. Lecha, to you, is how we would translate this into English. Now, by the same token, if I have a shava at the end of a word, that is obviously closing a syllable. It's a closed syllable, and under a consonant that's at the end of the word, it's at the end of the syllable, a shava is always silent. Okay, so shavas at the beginning of a word are vocal, at the end of a word are silent. Here is a similar word, and this also means to you, but this lecha over here at the top is to you man, this is to you woman. Now notice that this final kaf has a shava in it, and it, as the shava under a final consonant, must be silent. And we would vocalize this then as lach, lach, not lacha, but lach with no sound after it, because silent shavas are not vocalized at all. Okay? So lecha, vocal, lach, silent. All right. Now, there's another situation where we can say it's always the case, just like always, this one's vocal, this one's silent, and that is in the middle of a word. In the middle of a word, if I have 2 shavas side by side, then I can always say that the first one, remember we're reading from right to left in Hebrew, the first one is always silent, the second one is always vocal. Okay? You can take this to the bank. Example, car, mali. Okay? Here I have a set of consonants, just like these boxes represent, and 2 shavas in the middle. Not at the beginning, not at the end, but in the middle. The first one is not vocal. The first one is silent. The second one is vocal. So this is car, no sound, and then mali. Car, mali. And in terms of transliteration, it will look like that. Okay, Caramely. There's two shavas in our Hebrew, but since the first one's silent, there is no representation of it in my transliteration. I only transliterate the vocal shava as a small superscripted E. Now, the final situation is the one that's the trickiest, because with these first three, we could say it's always the case if the shava is in one of these three positions. But what if I have a shava not at the beginning of the word, not at the end of the word, and I don't have two shavas together inside of a word, but just one inside of the word? Okay? What do I do there? Well, here is where my political colors come out. And that is, I am just on the political spectrum, more to the right than to the left. I tend to vote that way. And whenever we have a shava in the middle of the word, there's going to be something we need to do in order to determine whether it's silent or vocal. And that is going to be to look to the right. Okay? As someone who's politically on the right, I would say yes. The answers are always found on the right, not on the left. So look to the right, and what you're looking for is the vowel that is to the right of the shava symbol. Because if the vowel is long, then the shava is vocal. And if the vowel is short, then the shava is silent. Okay? That's what you're looking for. If you see a shava in the middle of a word, look to the right. If the vowel is long, it'll be a vocal shava. If the vowel is short, and then it'll be a silent shava. Okay? So let's look at a couple of examples. I have written here two words. So for the first one, notice I have a shava in the middle of the word. I don't know whether that's to be vocalized or not. So what do? I'm going to look to the right to the vowel before it. What's the vowel here? This is the vowel holum, and holum is long. Okay? Since holum is long, my shava must be what? It must be vocal. And so I'm going to pronounce this as ko, to, la. Ko, to, la. Ko, to, la. Vocal shava because a long holum is to the right. On the second one, I have a shava in the middle of the word, and so I need to look again to the right to find the answer to whether this is vocal or silent. And notice that I have a pathak. Pathak here is a short vowel. Pathak is short, and it is a short A. If it's short, then the shava is a silent shava, and this is going to be pronounced car, no shava sound, car-mel, car-mel. All right? Now, sometimes it's nice to have mnemonic devices to help you remember things. Here's one. If you look to the right and you see a short vowel, the shava is silent. Short, silent, shava, those all start with S, okay? And if you see something that doesn't start with an S, i.e. a long vowel, then of course it's not going to be the silent shava, but the vocal one. All right? So, hopefully that will help you. Now, in order to really make good use of this rule, you have to know your vowels, and you have to know which ones are long versus which ones are short, okay? So, do not neglect to learn the vowel length. If you know which ones are historically long and tone long, then you know your long vowels. Your other ones are short vowels, okay? So do pay attention to that. Well, up to this point, I've given you symbols for a vocal shava, VS, and a silent shava, SS. We'd also have a third symbol for a kind of shava called CS. That is a compound shava. Now, in ROS 3.3, we're introduced to the concept of a compound shava. For all intents and purposes right now, we're just learning what they look like and when they will occur. Now, we'll get into more of the nuts and bolts of when you might expect one later. But the word compound means a combination of two things. So if you put a compound together, as in a molecular compound, you're bringing two different things together to form something. And a compound shava is going to consist of two symbols, a compound of symbols, which will look something like this. this is the vowel pathak with a shiva symbol. So it's a compound of a vowel and a shiva symbol. This other one is a sigol with a shiva beside it. And the last one is a kamet ketuf with the shiva beside it. These are considered single symbols. That is, they are one type of vowel pointing, and they represent a kind of vocal shiva. They are transliterated with the A and a little cup or teacup kind of thing. It's called a brev symbol. The one with the sigol has the E, and the kamet ketuf is a short O with the brev symbol over it. Okay, so when will you see these compound shivas? You will see them under gutturals. Okay, you will see them under gutturals in place of something, in place of a vocal shiva. So there are times when a guttural ought to have a vocal shiva under it, but Hebrew does not allow a guttural to have a vocal shiva, and instead a compound shiva will have to replace that vocal shiva. Now we need to remind ourselves, what are the guttural consonants? The guttural consonants are those consonants that are formed in the back of the throat, and they are he, chet, ayin, and aleph. Okay, those are our 4 guttural consonants. These cannot take a simple vocal shiva. They must have a compound shiva instead. So basically, for all intents and purposes, a compound shiva is simply a kind of vocal shiva. Do you vocalize vocal shivas? Yes. And you will therefore vocalize compound shivas. Basically, the compound shiva is going to be pronounced sort of like the short vowels that represent half of the symbol here, but they could even be more reduced than that as well. Let's take a look at 3 words, each of which have the compound shiva. I've written for you here the first one. This is the word for ground in Hebrew, and the aleph, which is a guttural, has a compound shiva of the A-class variety here. Now this is called katef pathak, okay? That compound shiva is called katef pathak. And the word katef basically means hurried. It's a hurried pathak sound, or rather a reduced pathak sound. It's a pathak that has reduced to the point where it's no longer pronounced as a full vowel. So how will we pronounce this? You could pronounce this as adama, adama, or even adama, adama, sort of like about. Okay, adama or adama. A lot of students will basically pronounce a katef pathak just like a regular pathak. I do try to reduce them just because I think that that's how they would have been pronounced at the earliest stages of the language. Now, this segol with the shiva symbol is called a katef segol. Katef segol, a very hurried segol. And here this is the word for God, Elohim, Elohim, or just simply as an a sound, Elohim, Elohim, Elohim or Elohim. And then this is called katef kametz, katef kametz. And it's really a kametz ketuf with a shiva symbol, and it's either pronounced as a very, very short O, oni, or reduced to the point of no distinction, ani, ani. And this means affliction. All right, so what's the point of these? Simply, again, pardon the pun, the point is that when you need to put a vocal shiva under these words or these gutturals, Hebrew requires a compound shiva instead. Now, with gutturals, silent shiva is okay. So, will you ever see a shiva symbol like this over here under one of the gutturals? Yes. And if you do, guess what? You will know that it's a silent shiva, because if it were a vocal shiva, it wouldn't be there. It would have to switch to one of those 3. All right, so that is the compound shiva.